Everybody, this is Dream, and this is going to be the college football slate for Friday night, which is Navy, SMU, UTSA, and Florida International. This particular slate is a little bit not ideal, but I did manage to find some good options available at each position. So it's kind of hard because the prices and stuff don't really work too well on this particular slate. Like yesterday's college football slate was really awesome. Everybody had nice value, and it was very easy to build up the type of lineup you would want. On this particular slate, it's going to be fairly harder. So I do have some good value options here, but everybody's a little bit more risky on this particular slate as well than you would potentially like. So let me get into the games here. So we have SMU and Navy first. Now these two teams are the higher over-under at 75.5, and also the closer game where SMU is favored by 12.5 points. Neither two games here are very even. The UTSA FIU game here is a 63.5 point over-under, and then UTSA is favored to win by 33.5 points. So that's a pretty massive difference. Needless to say, there's really not much on FIU that looks all that appetizing. But I do have two players to mention from their team, just because you need some contrarian options available. So I'm going to just go through each team and give you the best options on those teams. Now, from the quarterback perspective, I'm going to talk about all four of the quarterbacks that are in this particular slate, because quite frankly, all of them have some utility on this particular slate itself. So let's go ahead and get into Navy. So Navy, they really don't throw the ball very much, but they do run the ball a lot, and that's kind of going to be the key here. Now, typically, for a team that runs the ball a ton, their quarterback doesn't do much. In this particular case, Levatia, he actually does run the ball a good chunk of, in some of these games. And so, like, if you look at his thing, somewhere between 10 and 20 rush attempts is probably what we're going to look for. Even though I had a few less in the last game, but that was kind of a blowout, so that's probably a lot of the reason why. In his favor, actually. This game is going to be a little bit harder, but they are going to run the ball a lot. He's probably not going to throw it too much. He probably won't throw for a touchdown, but he does have potential to get a rushing touchdown. So, my recommendation for him, if you decide to utilize him, put him in the S-Flex spot here. Because you can put quarterbacks there, and he's basically a secondary running back at this point based on the potential value and stuff like that. His fantasy points are also pretty set when it comes to being able to get somewhere between 10 and 20 fantasy points, and so that's a pretty safe option. His price is a little bit higher than we probably would like based on that, but overall it's fine, and I do think he's actually a pretty solid play, and especially a good value play on this particular slate. In the running back situation, for Navy, the big guy here is Fafana. Now, Fafana, he does run the ball the most on this team, and as you can see, he has had several games where he didn't do well, but in this last game, he finally broke out and had a 3-touchdown game and had a massive game. I don't know if he's going to be able to do that against this type of team, but he does have some utility on this matchup, and so I do think he's a decent option on the slate. Their backup running back is Terrell, which you can see he doesn't run the ball as much as some of the other players, but he does actually get some receptions throughout the air, and that actually gives him some utility here. Now, he's a very boom or bust option when it comes from that perspective, but his price is also very cheap. I don't necessarily love these two running backs, but I do think that you could probably mix one of them in, assuming that he's probably Fofana, most likely, if you think he's going to be able to have a similar game as he did last week. It seems like that this team does just kind of use a massive stable of running backs. You can see that all these guys do get some rushes. And earlier in the season, it seemed like they were kind of rotating who they were trying to utilize to see who would be good. And, each one of these guys have like 1 or 2 games where they did decent, but then the rest of the games they didn't do well at all. But I think Fofana is going to be the top dog on in this particular slate. But again, you still have to be a little bit worried because of the overall matchup and stuff. In the wide receiver range, we really don't have anybody from this team to like at all. Like I said, really the best option at wide receiver for them is Terrell. He's the most likely to get a couple targets where he would have some potential for yards. But they really just don't throw the ball much, and I don't expect them to throw the ball much in this game. even if they get behind, they just run the ball a lot, and I suspect that's going to be how they go about it. For SMU, now this is more interesting. Uh, Tanner Kadai, sorry if butchering your name. He's been pretty consistent so far this season. He had one bad game against UCF, kind of, but UCF's actually pretty good compared to what they normally play, and in this game is going to be a nice little plus matchup for him. And as you can see in these plus matchups, he's throwing the ball a lot, throwing a lot of yards, and had good fantasy points output. Obviously, he's pretty expensive at $7,900, but he's a good option on this particular slate. I look for him to have another big game. The only really downside with him is that he doesn't have the touchdown upside as UTSA's quarterback has on the season, so you do have to be a little bit wary of that, but I still think he's a decent option on this particular slate. In the running back situation for SMU, we have Trey Siggers. Now, just to be clear, Navy does have a pretty decent rush defense, so I don't love him, and he doesn't go for a ton of attempts, and he's not a big yards per carry guy either, but he has had some solid games. I think he's a good secondary option if you need to find a way to sneak him in there. I do suspect that they're going to get a lot of touchdowns. The catch with them is that they're probably going to throw for most of them, and he's not a guy that really gets many receptions or yards, and so while he is their top running back, he's kind of a secondary option on this particular slate, but I do think he's somebody you have to take a look at. In the wide receiver range, now SMU has a couple guys that are out and or questionable here, and that just makes Rashee Rice the top option. He's been extremely good this season. He's my top play on this particular slate. He also has the most receptions and yards on this particular slate of any wide receiver in this core. And SMU, they tend to kind of go at only a couple of the different wideouts. Now, again, a couple of them are hurt. Now, that definitely makes Moochie Dixon, a good option on the slate. He has been doing pretty decent, even though he only gets a few receptions a game. Anyway, he's been getting good yards, so I do like him. And I don't suspect that Daniels here will be much of a big presence in this particular game. But I do think that it's going to be Dixon and Rashee Rice as the top options for them, and I look for them both to have potential to score some touchdowns in this game. I will say that SMU, they like to target the top few running backs or wide receivers the most, and so I look for them to do that in this game, especially with a high scoring output and being able to throw the ball as well as they do. For UTSA, now they are the favored to win team here, and they end up with my favorite option at quarterback, which is Frank Harris. He is absolutely just dominating teams, and if you look at his fantasy points, he's been doing really well. In games he's favored too, he's going to score a lot of fantasy points in this one, potentially get several touchdowns and run for several touchdowns. He is a guy that also runs the ball pretty well. 52 rushes for 250 yards is not too bad for a quarterback here. He's tops on this slate for that, and he's also tops in yards and touchdowns with a whopping 13 touchdowns already this season. And I really do like him here. As you can see in his fantasy output, he's been pretty solid, had some 40 points and 30-point games, and he's a top guy on the slate overall at quarterback position. And his price is actually not that bad at quarterback. If you look at the quarterbacks, he's actually third in price, which is amazing. He's my favorite play at this position. So anyhow, when we look at running backs, we're looking at Brady and Smith here. Now Brady is their top option here, and he's gonna have plenty of opportunities. He also gets catches through the air, and you can see that he's been pretty consistent on his fantasy output, especially in games where they've been pretty good. Really, only one game where where it was a blowout did he not do particularly great, but he still had some receptions, still got nearly 10 fantasy points, and at his price point, we can live with that. And so I do like him on this particular slate. And I think he's probably one of my favorite plays at running back as well. He also leads this slate with the most attempts rushing as well. Now, Treelon Smith, because this game's going to get blown out, he's likely going to have a good amount of options to play here. He did miss a couple weeks early in the season, but he's been pretty good the last couple weeks. And his price is so cheap that I think he's a great option on this particular slate. I really do like him here. Then we're going to look at wide receivers for UTSA. And that now UTSA has three guys that they rely on mostly, and they all are set to play. And those are Franklin, Clark, and Cephas, and they've all been extremely good. If I had to rank them, it's definitely going to be Franklin, then Cephas, then Clark, simply because of the consistency factor. Clark has the most upside when it comes to sheer fantasy points, but the other two have been more consistent at getting those points. As you can see with Clark, yeah, he had a 51-point game against Texas Southern, I guess, and but he had some lower games as well. So overall, I think that said, this slate is really tough to kind of build because of the types of matchups, but overall, I do like all three wide receivers from that UTSA team. And finally, we're going to look at FIU. Now, FIU's starting quarterback is Grayson James here. Now, he's been very inconsistent. This is a game where they're probably going to get blown out. And as you can see in the games that he's been blown out, he hasn't done quite that good, not gotten very good. I don't suspect he's going to have a very good game here. He does rush the ball a little bit, so that does give him some upside. And he definitely passes the ball a lot more than Navy's quarterback does. So I'm just mentioning him from that perspective. As for FIU at running back, we do have Lexington Joseph. He's their top option. He doesn't get a ton of rushes, though, and he does rely on getting a pretty good average in order to score decent fantasy points. I really find it hard-pressed to find him to get a touchdown in this matchup. But he could get somewhere between 5 and 10 fantasy points in this game. And so if you're just desperate for value, then he could be somebody you could take a look at. But I definitely don't recommend him for a very high level. And it comes to wide receivers, their best wide receiver is hurt and it's questionable, and we don't know if he's going to play. He's going to be a game-time decision. He would be the only guy that I would even remotely consider at the wide receiver core. But honestly, he doesn't get enough receptions to be super valuable, and he's a little bit risky based on his injury situation, as well as the fact that sometimes he doesn't do very well. The other guy here, if that guy doesn't play, that could get some more reception in this game is Bracy. But again, they're favored to lose by 33.5 points. There's a possibility that they don't score a touchdown. So I don't really love anybody on this team. I just wanted to review the couple of players that you could potentially use if you're just desperate for somebody. So with that said, thank you guys for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below. If there's anybody that I left out that you think I should have covered, feel free to leave that below as well. And have a nice day, guys.